Hello, EnderSword here again, this time with a Gold League replay featuring a Terran player, kNeverland, who posted this replay up on the TeamLiquid.net strategy forums looking for advice on what he could have done to actually win this game out. And his opponent today is going to be aTbrooklyn, the Protoss player down here in the bottom right-hand corner. We're on Tal'Darim Altar today, so this is going to be a pretty big macro game. There's going to be a lot of bases and things like that going on, and a lot of macro situations to look at. The three key things that I'm going to focus on most in this game is the real importance of supply blocking yourself, like obviously avoiding supply blocking yourself. Not a good thing to do, but particularly at key times, you really have to be planning ahead to make sure that you're not supply blocking yourself, because it can really cut into advantages that you gain in the early and mid game. And particularly for a race like Terran, where you have to pull your SCVs off, you need one off for each of the depots that you want to put up. It's not like Zerg, where you could just decide to make 4 overlords, or a single probe can throw down 5 pylons at once. You actually are cutting into your resource gathering by pulling those off, and it takes a little longer to get it done. It's consuming that energy to do it, so you have to actually really try and stay ahead of your supply blocking and make sure that you know when your production is going to start ramping up, so that you know when you've got to stop doing, say, 1 depot at a time and start doing 2, 3, 4 depots at a time in order to accommodate the level of production that you actually have going on, because it does rise very quickly throughout the game. Second thing that I'm going to look at is just macroing in general, making sure that you are always producing and that you're always adding production facilities. And as an offshoot of that, I'm going to look at the production of workers and actually the allocation of workers between your bases and how many you have throughout the game. So there's ways that you can optimize your production of them and the resources that they gather by planning out where they are, what resources you're getting, and so forth. The third thing that I'm going to look at, which plays a big role in this game, is engagements. So engaging well, knowing kind of where your opponent is, what they may have, and what sort of engagement you need to take advantage of that and get yourself into the best position. So we'll be slowing down some of the major battles as they occur, and taking a close look at what we could do differently in those, without getting into too complicated micro or anything, but just in terms of your initial engagement into a fight, what you can do better. So, with that out of the way, into the actual game here, we're going for a gasless opening. 3 barracks going down and the command center going up before ever getting any gas here. That is something certainly that Terran players are starting to do a little more, just defending with Marines, putting up a bunker, and taking advantage of that, particularly on large maps like this. It's very hard for the Protoss to really mount a major assault against you in the first several minutes of the game, so you can often be fairly safe doing this. The initial scouting did come in and saw that there was 1 gas here. He didn't actually see whether the other gas was up. He didn't get quite far enough over, but he could see that there was no probes going in between it. So he can be aware that there at least was no gas finished there at the time, and he came in at around the 4-minute and some odd mark. So it looks like a pretty normal 3 gateway and taking his own expansion. So again, the Terran player isn't expecting anything super big going on. He went for 2 gases at the same time and is then adding tech labs and a reactor to his barracks. Now, this is the type of situation that is going to result in supply blocking for a lot of people. Right now, you're not actually producing a lot out of these buildings. You were just adding the add-ons to them. But you've now got 2 orbital commands up, which are going to be producing SCVs fairly constantly. This reactor is going to come up, allowing it to double its production. These are now going to come online with a more food-heavy unit, whereas before they were producing probably just Marines. They're now going to be producing something consuming 2 food out of each. This puts you very much in danger of supply blocking yourself. So you have to know that this may be a time when you want to abandon simply building 1 depot at a time and get 2 down ahead so that you're avoiding that situation. Did have a little poke by the Protoss player here at the bunker. Just taking a look at the resources lost. He did lose a couple of stalkers and a zealot there. Mismicroed the situation a little bit, but again, the Terran isn't really in any danger here at all. This is a bit of a harassment poke, but he's not going to do anything beyond maybe picking off a Marine or 2. That bunker's very safe. Does have the SCV in place to be repairing that. Good thing to do, certainly, and that's not in any danger. So the Terran's efforts are pretty much thwarted here, and he's quickly going to end up going back home. Not a lot was killed there. The Protoss player did lose a few too many units just to miss microing. He accidentally went in too far and got a few picked off. But here back home we do see that the supply blocking, which I predicted is in fact happening, that he got behind on his depots as his attention was focused down here, and that production just kind of came online all at once. Again, we're about to see that happen again. Our factory coming up and a reactor going on it, meaning that very quickly you're going to have 4 more supply being produced out of this factory in a short period of time. He'll be building, say, 2 Hellions or something of that nature out of here. So you've got to try and stay ahead of that supply. We're at 70-70 again, and he's going to be blocked after this round of units, as there is no depot in production until right now. Finally, he does go and try and start 3 at the same time to make room, but still, we're now at a big block here during all of this. So the early advantage that was really gained by holding off that little rush by Protoss and some of the expensive units that he lost, 2 Stalkers and a Zealots that he lost in that initial little attack, that advantage is a little bit squandered by the fact that we're not getting this overwhelming force out that we could have had we not been supply blocked at 54 supply and again at 70 supply. So that's something that certainly you want to be making sure it doesn't happen. And again here, now that we're not supply blocked, just wasn't making for a little while, wasn't actually producing units, and all of this is just going to set you a little further behind, whereas this force back in the Protoss base could have actually been overwhelmed at this early point in the game if he was able to keep that production going. This is actually a pretty scary group of units, but you can imagine adding about, say, 8 more units to that and getting these medevacs out sooner, such that that group is now down here across the map and engaging this. Well, that wouldn't even be a close fight. This would be just a complete walkover. At this point, the Marauders would just rip those up, particularly with any medevac support. So when this push out does finally kind of come and he moves into the middle of the map, it's just a little late. It's just a little behind what he could have been. And all of a sudden now, this far into the game, the early advantage of a few units that were lost doesn't make that much of a difference when you're then talking about an army of, say, 25 units, or 20 units, I guess there. The fact that, say, 3 are missing, not that big of a deal. When it was down to 12 units, if 3 were missing, that is a big deal. So it's just a matter of timing and getting that out quick. He did, again, supply block himself at 110, and then basically overreacts by then throwing down tons of depots at the same time to clear up a lot of supply. So you want to avoid doing that, because that should be funneled towards your army as opposed to being spent on just putting up too many structures before you actually need them. You don't want them before you need them, and you don't want them too far after you need them. You want them coming in at the right time. Make sure, of course, that you're keeping track of your rally points as well. Sometimes people forget to group their new structures in and won't take advantage of adding them to their army or getting them to a rally point. At the 13-14 minute mark here, we do see that he is going for an expo. He probably could have been doing that shortly after holding the initial attack here. At about the 10-minute mark, you may want to think about clearing out those rocks in this game and adding the expansion right then. Also keep an eye out for this little observer. That's telling the Protoss very clearly what he can afford to do right now. So the Protoss knows that he's safe putting down an expansion because he'll be able to respond by the time this army makes it back across the map. It is worth a scan. It is definitely worth a scan to take these observers out so that they're not keeping track of your entire army. The opponent just feels so much safer in tucking up and expanding if they know exactly where you are. If he can't see that, then for all he knows, you could be right here at the mouth of his base, but you're not because he's got that observer watching the whole time. So just keep an eye out for that blur. Make sure that you scan it when you see it. It annoys them. It can sometimes delay Colossus production or anything like that. Anytime you make a robo make something else, it's annoying. They also do cost a little bit of gas, so that is something that you want to keep in mind. And obviously, not only is it telling your opponent your position, but in terms of whether he's safe to do something else, but when it comes down to one of these engagements, he's going to know exactly where you are and be able to position for the exact attack while you're actually responding reactively. In this battle, I will rewind this, the Terran player does come out ahead, but he could have actually come out a lot more ahead if he was prepared for the engagement, really keeping an eye on his army and taking advantage of some basic micro situations. So just going to back that up and look at this slowly as we see that engagement start to happen. Went a little too far there. But again, we do have, as these two armies start to clash, the Protoss player is perfectly aware that the clash is about to happen, gets his zealots into position, whereas the Terran stims a little late, just is caught flat-footed, doesn't move back, takes a huge amount of damage due to storms, and while these force fields eventually would have been able to hold the Terran army back, on the initial engagement, the Terran could have actually kited back to take advantage and stop the charging zealots from coming into contact so quickly. By doing that stim and pullback and then getting concussive shells on the Protoss army, you really cut into that zealot advantage. He had such a mass of zealots there that it just didn't do him any favors to be caught flat-footed like that and completely attacked by them. Now, here we have a case of being a bit aggressive with a dwindling force. He's also stimming a little too much when he came in here, had his army down to the yellow and red, and we're just kind of getting picked off. You want to know when you can push further and when you've got to draw back, and he shouldn't have really attempted to go up this ramp here. He's secured himself quite a big supply lead by crushing that force throughout the middle, but you don't want to be giving that up by overextending yourself and allowing them to kind of counterattack. Miss rallies here lead to the loss of a few of these expensive ghost units, and he just gets pushed back a lot further than he has to. Than if he had voluntarily pushed back, he would have had the Protoss a little more on his back heel, wouldn't have lost those extra units, and so on, and wouldn't now be in a defensive rebuilding position, would be in a very scary remassing position and ready to make a second push, probably right around now in the game, as opposed to being way back in his own base again and not really on the offensive. So behind that, even though the Protoss has just lost a big battle and is now 50 supply, 60 supply behind, because he was able to see his opponent overextend and go all the way back home, he can expand again. Just because this map is really big and because there's physically no pressure on his front, he can actually afford to invest in units that are very high tech and rebuild his army kind of one part at a time. Whereas if he knew that there was still a big attacking force out there, he would have to only make immediately defensive units. He would have had to focus entirely on, say, Zealots or Stalkers, and not really have been able to reach out and get some High Templar, which aren't going to be immediately good until they build their energy up and so forth. So that has taken the pressure off the Protoss player in this game and caused the Terran to just come all the way back home. Now we see here again a few idle production facilities there. There's a lot of money built up. Now he is obviously capped in his supply. We've now hit 200, and a lot of money is stockpiling up. People will look around and say, okay, well there's a bunch of barracks there, a bunch of barracks here, you know, that's enough. It's never enough. There's really no such thing as too much production. So if this starts to happen, you're kind of max supply. Just start making like 10 more barracks if you have 1,500 minerals with nothing to do with them. And then when this engagement happens, where it's not a disaster, you kind of trade off armies again. Ghosts end up taking these Archons out. And pretty much you've just wiped out each other's armies again and are restarting from zero. You're going to be able to build up again so much quicker if you've got all those extra facilities down. And he's now producing at pretty much full capacity. I think he just forgot to add this one to the control groups with the rest of his barracks. But he's trying to now produce, but can't actually even keep up with the amount of income that is coming in. So just be adding facilities. If you end up with 25 barracks, that's fine. If that's what it takes for you to spend the money that you have, then do it. Because you're going to be able to basically instantly, in 25 seconds, make a completely new army when your opponent is going to be limited by the number of warp gates they have, which is also a lot. But if you've got literally 20 facilities that are pumping things out, you're just going to be able to overwhelm them with the sheer rate of production that you have, as opposed to having to constantly pull back, regroup a few rounds of production, and then push out again, and then push out again, and then push out again. If you've just got this stream of units constantly coming out at a rate that they can't possibly match, then that's the position you're in. So while the Protoss player is basically broke right now, the Terran has so much money he can't even spend it. And whenever you get in that can't even spend it phase, it means that you need to be attacking, you need to be adding facilities, and you need to be making room for you to continue to spend it. He's got his max upgrades done. Maybe he could be tacking up to something else. Add on a bunch of Thors or something like that. Add on a bunch of tanks. Go to battle cruisers if you feel like it. Like, tack up. Don't get stuck in a role. Just don't get stuck in the position that you're in. And don't just sit on a maxed army. You want to be using that army. Now, if you look at the scouting information, he's not even aware that there's the fourth base going on here. But he is aware that there's certainly a third. So you could be poking at that. You should be scouting around the map. At this point, resources are very, very high, to the point that you might as well be using your scans to take a look around the entire map, see exactly what's going on. Now, as this engagement comes in, it's kind of a shame. This is basically the reason he ends up losing the game. He tries to gather his army together, but they come in pieces to the point that the Protoss player is able to just pick everything apart. So while he gets an EMP off in the middle of this army, this one's very, very inefficient. It only takes a couple units, doesn't really catch on to the Archons, doesn't end up getting good EMPs, all enough to actually stop this. Attacks at a really bad angle where the Zealots can get a lot of surface area, very grouped up for the Archons, and just ends up walking through this. But even after this completely disastrous attack for the Terran player. He gets absolutely destroyed. The supplies are still even. And if we had those production facilities on the ground, at 25-20, imagine 25 seconds later having 30 more Marines than we currently do, by having a few more reactored barracks out onto the ground. The Protoss now has to get through tons of bases, doesn't even know where to attack right now, ends up going around before he really even chooses a target. His level of production, his level of money is nowhere near what the Terran's capacity is. So while he does continue to make units and warp in units to reinforce, he's going to be a lot more limited in what he can do, and he can only keep that up to a certain extent, whereas the Terran could be dipping in a lot more than that. Terran does come out to try and engage that army, probably not the best idea. At this point, you've kind of lost that base, but you do have tons of other mining locations, so you want to be using those to your advantage and not focusing on pushing out. At this point, let them come to you until you've got your army back up, and then try and hold and push back out. Instead, by doing that again, he's engaged with only one piece of his army into the entire Protoss army, and it's just hardly ever efficient to do that. And does get picked apart here. We do have a nice warp prison coming in and allowing him to start warping in directly into the Terran base. Once he's on your production facilities, it is a lot harder to rally things together. But if we look at the time signature there, if there had been more production on the ground, more actual capacity in the game, then he would have had time to get about 3 to 4 rounds of it out. If you had 3 to 4 rounds of 20 plus barracks out, that's just an army that would have overwhelmed us. So as much as he had the economic advantage, as much as he had the supply advantage the entire game, and as much as he was relatively keeping up with the production facilities he did have, there's always these times when you can just add more to it, and that's definitely what ended up costing him the game. So the two main things were just the engagement in this area. Unfortunately, engaged with his army broken into parts. You just can't be doing that. A lot of that's a lack of awareness of where the enemy army was. You've got those scans this late in the game. Be aware of where they are. Make sure that you're touching these watchtowers as you go so that you have an eye on where your opponent is. You don't want a group coming through here while your main army's coming from here and stragglers are coming from below. You just can't be split up by that when you're facing a big Protoss ball. You have to make that engagement soundly, or it's just not really going to work. You have to be taking advantage of the ghosts. The ghosts do so much damage to the Protoss army, particularly when they are based on High Templar, Archons, charge lots. A single really good EMP can just do 1,000 plus damage instantly. It's way worse than a storm. It's the most destructive spell in the game, and it's instant cast with a very huge range, and it comes equipped on a unit that has cloaking that was never actually used during this game. He did research the Ghost Cloak, but it was never put into use to go out and scout that army and blanket it with EMPs before the engagements. A lot of the EMPs came after the engagement was already done, or not done, but already engaged. They were already fighting, so units weren't balled together in a nice group that makes the EMP so effective. So a lot of that was just a lack of awareness where the army was. Each time they clashed together, it was as if the Terran player was surprised to see the Protoss army at that point in the map. So he was just flat-footed each time. He just hit stem and engaged in the place they were. He never stemmed into the engagement, never kited away from it, never blanketed it with EMPs, never got a good concave or position, just came as a static ball and got surrounded by those zealots and just taken out. So it was just the shape of the engagement that really made a big difference here. And obviously then, even after those huge losses, just not having enough. And I know a lot of people will look at the number of production facilities and say that's a lot. Yeah, it is, until you're on 5 bases. In this case, basically 6 bases were essentially up at the same time. Now, I know some weren't mining anymore. They were out of resources, but that is a very big macro game. You can't have the same number of facilities down that you did on 2-3 bases when you're now on your 5th, your 6th. That's just going to be ramped up, and you've got to be accommodating for that fact and really making sure that your production is getting out there. So that's overall what's going on in this game. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, at about the 10-minute mark, you probably could have ended it right then, but supply blocking was the big opponent in the early and mid game. And while he did, obviously, you take care of that once you're at 200 anyway, you're not going to get supply blocked again unless they take out your depots. But that prevented an early win after a lot of early victories in holding off a Protoss rush. A counterattack was essentially stopped not by the Protoss themselves, but by the Terran not being prepared with enough depots to get a good enough force out to go and make that kill. So that's really what's going on, and thanks for watching, thanks for listening.